Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Matt, and today I'm going to make a video talking about my 5 favorite tools and calculators that I use with Beersmith3 every single brew day. I also have a video on my YouTube channel talking about Beersmith3 recipe development and how to use Beersmith3, so if you haven't already done that, make sure to check out that video. But we're going to go ahead and get right into my 5 favorite tools and calculators to use in Beersmith3. The first tool I want to talk about is something that I actually talk about in a lot of my grain to glass videos, and that's when I scale recipes from a 5-gallon batch to a 3.5-gallon batch. I initially designed recipes as a 5-gallon batch really for one main reason, and that's just because it's easier to build a recipe as a 5-gallon batch than it is a 3.5-gallon batch. And that's because there's most recipes online that are built are already built for 5 or 10 gallons. I use the scale recipe function in Beersmith3 right here on the top left-hand side to do all those volume changes. For an example, I have a cream ale recipe that I already changed to a 3.5-gallon batch, but I can show you how to up this to a 5 and then reduce it back down to a 3. You can really do this however many times you want. It's a pretty great tool. The first thing you want to do is you want to create a different equipment profile or add a bunch of equipment profiles for the different volumes that you want. If you go over here to the left-hand side, you can go to the equipment tab, and then you can duplicate your main 5-gallon recipe equipment profile and make different volume changes. So this is my main 5-gallon, it's 5.2, the 0.2 is for Trub. So this is my 5-gallon recipe, so I'll design a recipe in this profile. So you'll make another equipment profile here. So this is my 3.5 gallons. And then once you create the equipment profile, then you need to use the scale recipe function to change it over. So it's, like I said, it's already 3.5 gallons, but if you go to the scale recipe function, you can go here, you can choose the equipment profile that you want to change it to, and it's going to change all these values. I'm going to change it to 5. You want to make sure this match original gravity, color, and bitterness change is selected, and then look down here in these little scrolls as I hit OK. They barely change, color changed a little bit, and that's because it's trying to keep all the same values the same, the percentages the same. It's just increasing the volume of the liquid. The first thing you'll probably notice is the values over here aren't very pretty. It even changes like the 1.4 packets of yeast. So you're gonna want to try to make these values a little bit more workable. The second tool I want to talk about is actually something I talked about in my first Beersmith3 video, and that is in the starter tab. It is the yeast starter calculator. So whenever you add yeast and you build out your recipe, this is my American Imperial Stout recipe from the YouTube channel that Hannah made recently. If you go over to the starter tab, it will show your yeast that you selected. So we chose Flagship from Imperial Yeast. And in Beersmith3, it says there's 150 billion viable cells. And if you look to the left-hand side, 221 billion are needed to properly ferment this beer. So it shows how many packets to use if there is no starter. So you would recommend 2 packs, which would push us over to 300 billion cells, which is well enough needed to ferment this beer. Or you can make a liquid starter. So if you look down here, it actually shows your recommended starter size. So it'll be 1.38 liters of a starter. It will show the starting gravity that is recommended for the starter volume. So if we go over here, we can go 1.38, and it will tell us from this starting gravity, you will need to add 4.67 ounces of DME to hit the starting gravity. And this is the default value for the starting gravity. You can change this if you'd like, but this is pretty much what's recommended. I think it's like 1030 to 1040 for your starter. So it's like 1036 is I think the default, so you can just leave that as it is. But this will tell you for the recommended starter size, it's 1.38. For this gravity, you'll need to add 4.67 of ounces, and you'll generate 221 billion cells that you need to ferment this beer. Now, if you have a stir plate, stir plates pull a lot more oxygen into the yeast starter, so the efficiency increases drastically. So if we choose the use stir plate option, and you own a stir plate, it reduces the starter size to 0.82. So we can change this over here to 0.82. And now we need to only add 2.77 ounces of DME to hit that same amount of yeast cells to ferment this batch. The third tool I want to talk about is another tool I mentioned in my video that we talked about, and that is in the water tab, is the target profile water adjustment salts calculator that Beersmith has. I've been using this pretty much the second I started using doing water adjustments, and it's pretty great, and I'll show you how to use it here. So the first thing you want to do is you want to choose the water that you're using. I would recommend using distilled water or RO water. I prefer distilled myself. So you can go here and add the water you want. You can just search distilled right there and add your distilled water. Once the water is added, then you have to just go to match a target profile here on the right hand side. And then you want to punch in the values that you want. If you don't know where to get your values, a lot of times if you're looking on YouTube, YouTubers actually have the values that they recommend, the ppm for their batch. And since it's ppm, this value will be the same if it's a 100-gallon batch or a 5-gallon batch. It doesn't matter. The same ppm is going to apply. It's just going to scale up the amount that you need to add. So once you get your ppm or your recommended things from the YouTube video or the recipe you're following, or maybe you want to make some personal changes, you can go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to automatically make all the different adjustments you need to add to your water. And then if you go back to your design tab, it actually adds these water adjustments right in the recipe list here. So if we look at the bottom here, if we sort by type under water, it's going to have your chalk, your baking soda, your Epsom salt, and your calcium that you need to add. And if we go back to the water tab, it's all the same volumes here as well. Now, I should mention too that this is pulled from your mashing profile. So if you go over to your mash calculator, it's pulled from this. So I use a brew in a bag mash profile. So there's no sparge. If you sparge, then you want to go and create a mash profile here. And you want to make sure that this BIB is off. And then you want to add a sparge step here. If you have a sparge profile selected, it will split up these volumes a little bit. So you'll have 20% or whatever the volume is to sparge water to your boil volume for the sparge edition, and then you'll have the rest in your mash edition. That way, when your sparge water from your hot liquor tank also has these same changes in the sparge water as well. So if you see like your mash and your sparge options here, that's just because it's pulling the data that you do sparge from your mash profile in Beersmith3. The last thing I want to talk about regarding the water profile calculator is if you go over here, you can also exclude chalk. So if you don't have chalk, you can always hit this option and it will substitute other options for the chalk if you don't have it. And then also, if you don't want to type in one manually, you can always choose a water profile that Beersmith3 has available. So if you want to do like a London Porter or something and you want to do a London water profile, you can just type in London here, grab these options, hit OK, and it's going to make these changes directly to that recipe, and it will add it into your design recipe notes. The fourth topic I want to talk about is using Beersmith3 to make acid changes. You can make changes with lactic acid, phosphoric acid, or even acid malt. You can find this in the mash tab here. We're using my cream ale recipe as an example. If you go to the mash tab and look at the bottom right hand corner, you'll see this final mash and pH adjustments options here. The adjusted match pH option here, this is what Beersmith3 estimates your pH to be based on your design. So here's my design. I have some 2 rows, some flaked corn and carapils, and based on that, it's thinking that the pH will be around 5.73. If you know anything about mash pH can make measurable impacts on mash efficiency and also just the overall flavor of your beer. So mash hitting somewhere between a 5.2 and a 5.6 is always recommended with your mashing step. So since this is measured at 5.73, that's a little bit high. So what you want to do first is make this measured mash pH the same as this. That way we can estimate how much acid malt we need to add before brew day even starts. So once we make this the same as the adjusted pH, we want to make our target pH around 5.4. We choose 5.4 because it's between 5.2 and 5.6. And then right here, we can choose acid malt. Right down here, it will say how much acid malt you need to add to the beer to hit the 5.4 target that we're shooting for. You can always go over here too and add the acid malt into your design. So we use this acid malt since this is what's sold from my homebrew supply store, and it's around 10.3 ounces. So let's say it's 0.75 pounds. So yeah, 12 ounces. It's a little on the high side, but as you can see, once you add the 12 ounces of acid malt into your mash, it's going to now be the adjusted is 5.37, which is just under our 5.4 since it's a little bit higher than what we were targeting. But as you can see, it's in the acceptable ranges for between your 5.2 and your 5.6. If you also go to your design tab, you'll also see the acid malt addition in your design tab. So when you're getting your recipe together, you'll see this acid malt in the design tab. So for this example, we've been using acid malt, but the same rule applies to if you're using lactic acid or phosphoric acid. You can just change this over to lactic or phosphoric right here, and it'll tell you how much you need to add. So if we delete the acid malt addition, and let's assume we're going to hit the 5.73. And let's say we want to make a lactic acid addition here to adjust instead of the acid malt. You want to make sure the acid concentration is 88% on the lactic acid. 88% I believe is pretty standard. Phosphoric acid I believe is 10%. But if it is 88%, you just need to add the 5.6 milliliters to hit your target 5.4. So we do the add acid up here, lactic acid. It is 5.6 milliliters, and it will add it there, and again it will take that and add it into the design tab. Now this is obviously a great tool to figure out what adjustments need to be made early in the mash, and that's important because if you know anything about the mashing step, I know typically if you look at a recipe it recommends a 60-minute mash, but like 90% of the mash is done within like the first 20 to 30 minutes anyway. And when you take a pH reading, if you don't make adjustments before your brew day, half your mash is pretty much already going to be done before you figure out your pH reading. And that's because it's recommended that you wait 10 to 15 minutes into your mash step before you can take a pH reading in your mash. So if we make adjustments early in your brew day, at least you'll know you're within the 5.2 to 5.6. You might not be extremely accurate, and you won't know if you're accurate until you take an actual pH reading 10 or 15 minutes into your mash. But at least you're not like way off, way under, or way high when you start your mash. The fifth and final tool that I use every single brew day is hydrometer adjustments. And you can also do refractometer adjustments in this too, but I primarily use this for hydrometer adjustments. So if you go to the tools options here and you do hydrometer adjust, it'll pull up this really nifty calculator. If you don't already know, hydrometers are calibrated. You'll have to kind of read the box because a lot of them are calibrated differently, but I think standard they're measured at around 60 degrees or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're pulling wort out and you're putting like 150 degree wort in that vial, or really any temperature that's lower or higher than what it's calibrated to read at, your measurement is going to be off. So this calculator helps you pull in those numbers so you don't have to wait for it to cool up, or you don't have to heat up that wort in the hydrometer adjustment or the hydrometer flask. So for example, we hit right here, my hydrometer is calibrated to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And let's say I pulled a sample and my hydrometer measures at 1052. And let's say I just pulled this right after mash, and let's say it cooled to around 1040 from 1055. My actual gravity would be 1068. So, I mean, that's a massive adjustment right there, that 140 degrees, because it's calibrated to read at 60. Now, the measurement's obviously a lot less drastic. Like, let's say it's 90 degrees, then it's only 4 points off. But you can see how using this calculator would give you more accurate numbers, because if you like to do adjustments with dry malt extract before you put your beer into the fermenter like I do, I like to take a pre-boil gravity reading, see where I'm at, and then that tells me how much DME I need to add late in the boil, so I always hit my targeted gravity when I goes into the for my OG reading. And this is how I do it. This is, I take my pre-boil gravity reading, I put it in at 1050, let's say it measures at 140, I get my actual corrected gravity, and then that will tell me how much DME I need to add for Brewday. But that about covers it, guys. Those are my 5 favorite tools. I use them every single brew day, so I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of them, because it's definitely made my life using Beersmith3 easier, and also my brew days a little bit more efficient. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. There'll be more content coming soon. We have a grain to glass video coming out shortly here for a cream ale, so you can look out for that. But anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.